say, if you wanted to manifest a set of events. And there are ways you can combine energy. It's all about combining different types of energy with various compatible polarities. That's what sexual attraction is, and it's governed by the chemicals that are generated by the elemental forces that are generated by the structure of your light body and its function or dysfunction. So, if anybody's going to get upset with me here, I would honestly say, if you really, really have to, hate homosexuals, if you really have to insist that everybody should get horny and there's something wrong with a guy or a girl that doesn't, if you really, really have those beliefs and you feel really strongly about it, and I'm really ticking you off by saying it's different, we'll refund your money and you can leave, because you won't like anything that I have to say if you really are attached to those ideas. All right? Honestly, when I look at things of what's been done on this planet, it's really heartbreaking, because there are people who have been taught to hate other people because of the color of their skin. There are people who are white and hate blacks. There are people who are black and hate whites. There are people who are Israeli and hate Palestinians, and Palestinians who hate Israelis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Bigotry. Bigotry it's a twisted thought form that has created such misery where people could actually love and understand each other and help each other through the problems of this planet. It's instead turned them against each other in order for one to feel better than the other, because they didn't feel very hot about themselves in the first place. There is one more area that bigotry is applied, and it's reinforced by religions on this planet that are distortions of the natural Christian teachings, and not just Christian, because the original, what we call the Christ teachings, belonged to they were Buddhic teachings, they were Christian teachings, they were the Islamic teachings, all of those things, all put together, all right? These were the original teachings of the Christ, the Allah, the Buddha. These all have to do with the starborn cycle and the signature, the name signature, the original holy names that had to do with the vibrational frequencies of the original parts that created creation. All right. So bigotry is something that is hate-based. And if you point, it doesn't matter where you point it. If it's because somebody has a certain skin color, if it's because somebody has a certain partner of a certain gender and you don't think that's all right, who the hell are you? Is my answer to that. Who do you think you are to pass that kind of judgment on another person? Who are you as a white person to hate a black person, just to hate people because they're black? Who are you as a black person to blame white people for all the stuff that black people went through? Excuse me. I wasn't back there at that time, okay? If I had an incarnation that was part of the slave trade, I apologize now. But you know what? I wouldn't make that choice, all right? That might have been an aspect from before. But I'm not going to hate you, and I hope you won't hate me. Bigotry is enemy number one. You can be a bigot in many, many ways, where you start passing judgment on somebody else's way, where they're not doing anything to you directly, but you're passing judgment on them, and you're looking down your nose at them, and you're even cursing them under your breath. Or you're going out and standing on podiums and preaching that God said, this is evil. Who the hell are you? And that's what I say to any of the priests and ministers and popes on this planet, because it is a blasphemy of the highest level for anybody to take sacred sex and to turn it into perversion that is used as a way to divide and conquer individuals that are aspects, that are faces, sparks of the consciousness of God's source. And that is what's been done on this planet. So excuse me if I get a little bit passionate about that one, because there is so much harm being created by that. There are so many people that try so hard, say, to be heterosexual because they can't bear the thought of what hell their life is going to turn into if they actually find out they're homosexual. Or maybe they realize that, even if I were married to a girl, I still wouldn't want to have sex. Maybe they're asexual, and they're tried real hard not to be frigid, and they find themselves doing stuff called having sex just because it's the only way to have a relationship with somebody who'll stay. There are people who go through this one, where they'd really prefer to never, ever have to use those parts directly on the outside. And that is okay, too. Now you try to combine an asexual with a person that has a high sex drive, man, a heterosexual or something, you're going to have some relationship problems. And it's not that the one is frigid and the other is oversexed. If they can both recognize they have a different set of natural light body structure, that if it was before you got married and you happen to have that problem, it might be good to really talk to each other honestly. Can we build a relationship that we could each be happy with? Because I can't turn myself into a sex demon for you, and I don't expect you to become a priest, it's totally celibate for me either. You have to be fair and honor each other's. So there's a lot of things that when we begin to look at, what is this sexuality thing? What is its connection to spirituality? There are a lot of issues that hit home very, very deeply. They affect all of our relationships, what we choose to do, whether we choose to marry, who we choose to marry. And once we do choose to marry, what happens? Like, great, first year was great. Then what happened? I don't know. It all shut off. And we walk around and say, hello, good morning, going to work, bye, right? And there's just like, whatever we had once just dissolved. Where did that go? This has to do with keys, which have to do with tachyons and tachyon cycles. And who has what keys, and once you play those keys and they sing their little harmonies, if you don't have any more keys that are compatible, you'll find you have keys that are compatible with somebody else's, and so will they. And you'll start to feel attractions going in other directions. Relationships aren't always meant to be from the time you're 15 and too dumb to know you shouldn't probably get married right now, to when you are 900 and you finally decide, I'm going to drop the body just to get out of this marriage because somebody once told me that it was a sin and horrible to not stay married, that marriage had to be forever. If you're an eternal being, forever is, you could almost deal with that if you know you have about a 75, maybe 85, 90-year lifespan. Eternal can be frightening. What if, say, once upon a time you got incarnated and you were 16 years old and you had this pheromone rush and so did this lovely other person, and you got together and you even had 20 years of halfway decent connection. And all of a sudden it's just like whatever it was, it's different. It's nice. It kind of hums. It's kind of like glowing embers, but forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Care about each other enough to say, look, I love you and I won't abandon you, but what do we need to do? Bring life back in by not trying to let the mold be the relationship. Don't try to force the relationship to fit a preconceived mold. Relationships are made of living light bodies and living beings. If a relationship begins to take the life out of either one or both, there's something wrong with the mold. And that means there's some level of the selves that are not being honest with themselves as far as what they actually feel. If a person has some sexual issues where, say, they really thought that they really might have been like homosexual, but just couldn't bear the thought, like the family would have crucified them, that kind of stuff, forget it. So they got married, had the kids, the whole bit, and they still find themselves really, really unhappy and feeling bad, guilty toward the person they married maybe, because they really just don't have that sexual attraction. The other person's still attracted to them, and they're still going, I'm going through the motions. Wait, all right, excuse me, I'm getting interrupted. Wait a minute. What? And by the way, anybody who's new, I'm not nuts. I do this a lot. It's when I get the ones who write the books, right? The beloveds, the ones who give us all these lovely diagrams, they do talk live. We don't channel because we don't endorse doing that, but we do listen. And sometimes I'll get interrupted in the middle. Okay. Yeah, I do lose track of time. I did say I was only going to go for an hour, didn't I? All right. I'm basically being told to save it also that there's an activation coming through, and I would feel better probably upstairs when it hits. Here it comes. Oh, boy. Oh, wow. Okay. Anyway, if any of you that have been working with us, and particularly any of you who have done the Lights of Aurora activations or anything, if you've been getting any spiky, like almost feel like chemical burn on your skin, heats coming up here and there, that's normal. It's part of the purging. We're part of the earth elemental twisted mutations are starting to purge out, but we're getting cycles of those. And it's to bring the natural earth elemental kingdoms back online as we're working with the frequencies of connecting with the crystal spiral. So if there is one coming through. I'm going to see if it's a group one or if it's just another part of the one that's been my cycle. I've been up and down all day having to lay down because it's been making me nauseous and that kind of stuff. And I thought, oh, this one's for all of us. All right. Okay, there's going to be one running in the shield, in the group shield. And for anybody that's new, just so you know, you're never obligated to participate in any of the techniques that we do. We're not doing a technique right now. We're going to be doing techniques Sunday. You will not get any energies that you don't want. If you're working with any of our technologies from, like, say you had bought some of the stuff you're working at home and you'd start the DNA activations, you will probably just come right online with the Indigo Shield and you will get them too. But if you haven't been, you can ask, you can just kind of like put out to your own higher self and say, well, I'd like, you say your Christos self, aim for your Christos self. So I would like to, participate in this activation. Or you can say, I don't feel I'm quite ready to do this. I'm not too sure about this stuff yet, and that's fine. So if you want to receive the energies, when I make an announcement that they said there's an activation coming and it's running through the group shield, any of you always have the option, even if you've been with us for a long time and just decide you don't want to do that one or don't ever want to do one again, that's okay. Your free will always be respected, and you will not receive any energies that you say you do not want. But be clear, and that's why I tell you ahead of time, like especially if you're new, that if something is running in the group shield, because a lot of these people have been to workshop after workshop together, and it's just immediate. One starts to fire their fire letters in the DNA, and it kind of like starts to spread, and it goes really fast. You won't get that unless you ask for it if you haven't been participating with us. But you can ask and say, I'd like to try that. You can even say, I'll try it with a return policy. If I don't like doing this, right? We do not cord. You do not get chakra corded. You do not get implanted. You do not get plugged into somebody who's going to take over your body and you'll never see it again. So I just want you to know, if you're new, you're safe in doing that, but there's no obligation to participate in running of the energies. And I just want to say that. Anyway, I'm being told it's a good time to wrap up the orientation and to get back up where I can get the next piece in, the graphs, because right now I'm back to my pornographic cartooning. Because seriously, they're trying to show me where certain energy centers are in relation to this. And this is exciting stuff, because I don't know these things consciously either. And I can't wait to find out, because maybe it will do something to facilitate my asexual nature and becoming at least, I don't know, at least a step down would be nice, a step more focused into body. But for you guys, it will make it much more interesting, and at least we'll be able to give you one thing that will be valuable. When you go home, you will understand more about what you're carrying around in your body, with your body, than you might have before you came here. And once you understand that, you can start to kind of play with it just energetically. I'm not saying go play with yourself. I'm saying you can do that too if you want to, no problem, but you don't have to. But you can start thinking about it, like, there's certain ways you can breathe, that you can actually build energy down there, and then just move it up to do other things with it. You can use it for healing, you can use it for clearing. There's something where they had me do this today because I started getting really, really bad cramps on one of the activations that came through. It was a big data download. I'm going, oh, God, intestinal cramps. And they said, here, do this. And they had me bend over and run my Ruchite spiral in a circle, which was a new one. I'd never done that. And I realized, this is part of a technique, isn't it, for Sunday. And they said, yeah, it's not the whole thing, but it's part of it, but it'll help. And they had me breathe in a certain way with my palms on the floor and sitting in a chair with my palms on the floor. And it was amazing. After a certain number of breaths of a certain pace, it all just went, and I just sat back up, and it was fine. It was gone. It just shifted whatever was causing the cramping, in my body and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of things you can do with the sexual energies, and they can be converted into other things. There will be a time when we teach things about what couples can do once both sides of the couple knows some things about how to run their sexual energy. Because you'll scare the heck out of somebody if you know how to run your sexual energy, let's say, right? And you decide you're going to couple with them, and they're like just off the street and don't even know what a chakra is, right? And you start saying, well, I'm going to touch you here, and I'm going to do this. They're either going to think you're like a master of the universe and just like melt and like, be your puppy forever, which is not a relationship you want to establish. You'll regret it, believe me, you would. Or they would think you're like, some kind of like sex magician type, occult person, and might be very scared of you. So it is good to, once you understand a bit about these parts, there are gentle ways you can inform someone, loving ways. If you have a partner that doesn't want to hear about this stuff from workshops, that's fine. You can gently share little ideas with them so you don't terrify them. But you can learn to harmonize communications with each other. There are things you can do with just your palms, say before you go in for an evening date night. If you're married or whatever, you can do certain things with your palms that then runs through the chakras that creates a much more harmonious experience between the chemicals in the body as well as the energy fields in the body. So you have a much nicer connection together during the act of coupling. So there are ways that we'll start here with understanding our relationship with sexuality, our spirit, and ourselves and source. And then we will grow that into being able to share that with another person. And I don't think they'll ever take it into groups because, as far as I've heard, orgies are only for people who really need to suck energy off other people, because that's really what it is. People that want to do that stuff, we don't judge it. We're not bigoted about it. But there were times in the ancient times where it was abused terribly, where it was used to generate sex magic energy to blow open portals that didn't belong there, to do some really nasty stuff. You don't need to do that unless you're desperate for your own energy. Any one person or two persons that come together in the name of the Christ, where two or more are gathered in my name, the name of the Christ, it gives enough energy where you don't need the amplification factor of having a million bodies rolling around breathing and huffing and puffing. I mean, if you're going to do that, just simply, do a stand or sit in and have everybody just breathe their arcs. You know what I mean? You don't need to go fiddling with each other. You can generate just as much energy. I'm not judging anybody that's into the multiple partner scene, but it is exploited. There are certain, say, gurus and things like that who have these, sex energy parties and the whole bit, and you should be honored because I'm sleeping with you, and they're usually guy gurus. They have this harem, of women who, oh yes, I get to be touched by the guru. Oh God, aim vertically with that kind of stuff. There's a lot of abuse that goes down with sexual energy, and it couldn't happen if it weren't for the fact that most people don't understand what it is anymore, because the teachings of what that was, which were common knowledge in the Atlantean period, have been taken away from us, and they have been twisted. What is left are teachings by a bunch of people who created control dogmas to try to harness people's energy and use it for various things. Breeding is one of them. But the thing is, the knowledge is still, the sacred sex knowledge is still alive within you. It's just turned off. It's in the parts of the DNA that science calls the junk DNA. The natural chemical relationships of eternal life are still in there. And when we work with these energies and the techniques that this work is a part of, what we are doing is bringing that natural potential of eternal life, of the Christ, and of a natural sex drive back into manifest form. And I look forward to tomorrow to see how far we've gotten. I think tomorrow will be more, graph day, where, oh, by the way, it's funny, I had a bunch of graphs ready. I had 55 of them. For some reason, it came out 55, and I was thinking, got to get 4 more, right? Don't like the 55 number. It's one of those Metatronic numbers. But it's kind of funny because I've never had a suitcase get eaten alive by the airline, right? Yeah. We're still waiting for it. In fact, Az left because he had to go over again to see. They said, after 48 hours it should appear. Well, it still hasn't. They told him to come back to see if it came in on the next flight from London. So all of my clothes and the Mylars that I had prepared before are all in that suitcase that was eaten. We had 5 suitcases that we brought over with us because we're moving stuff into the house that we got in Colorado. And the only one that didn't come was the one that had my workshop clothes and the Mylars. So the only reason I had to put Mylars under, which I never used to, is because now they weigh the hand luggage. And 50 Mylars weigh a lot. Transparencies, they're heavy. So I'm always over on my hand luggage, so I had to stick it in. So it's kind of funny. Right now we're hoping that when Az comes back, we'll have those, and they at least have nice, clean drawings. I don't have the words on them yet. I was going to do that when we got here 2 days ago. They didn't show up. Yeah. So, I just wanted to explain too, hence my trousers that I'm hiding. Because the suitcase didn't show up, I thought I'd just share that with you. I'm wearing pajamas because they were very, very lucky that because the airline knew it messed up, it gave us a little voucher for, I think it was $75 to go replace whatever, because we know you don't have any clothes, right, to wear. Right? So we have, what are those, have everything you could ever want marts, not far from here, and $3 on the clearance rack. I got myself an outfit. Actually, I got myself 3, and you'll see each of them. But they're a bit lively. So I'm a bit color oriented, but this was even a bit intense for me. So if you're wondering why, and especially any new people, oh my God, look at me in these sunglasses, right? Yeah, it was. I wasn't going to dress quite this flashy or vibrant, but it had to do with the $3 clearance rack. Actually, at everything you could want mart right down the street. So I'm glad you're all here, and I hope we have a very interesting and hopefully healing workshop. I'm hoping that some of the things that we will be able to get down through in these 2 workshops will assist us each in private ways to heal a piece of something, because everybody's got a piece of sexual confusion with them. I would be amazed if you didn't, because it is a very complex issue, because sexuality is connected to everything. It's about your energy polarity balances, which are about how your light body is functioning, which has to do with not only you here, but also all of your other simultaneous incarnations in other space-time zones. Which means, yes, if you have a self back in ancient Egypt that's having a very big orgy in the sarcophagus and generating lots of light blue light balls, you can actually inherit some of those light balls right through your DNA, because time is simultaneous, which means it is happening right now. All the other times, it is a field of energy. And times are cycles of energy pulsations that all are happening at the same time in the same space. But they are at different speeds of pulsation and a different angular rotation of particle spin. So yourselves in other times are your incarnations, the rest of who you are right now. And they are all affecting you, but you are also affecting them. What you can do by getting elemental command back, the power of elemental command back in your present lifetime, the more you heal those powers within yourself, you actually will reach back right through your own DNA, backward and forward in time, to the other aspects of your own identity that are simultaneously incarnate. Which also means you will clear your karmic imprint. Because what karma is the influence of those other simultaneous space-time vectors, where your identity, because it was too big to come into one space-time vector, had to break itself down into specific patterns. And the smallest pattern you come in with is 1728. All right? That's 144 times 12. All right? So this is your family of consciousness. You will be helping your family of consciousness. You will also be clearing the influence of some, say, wanton members of your family of consciousness that might have got themselves into things that they probably shouldn't have in other space-times locations that are affecting you. You can begin to break that chemical link, because it is a chemical link in your DNA that actually what you did in ancient Egypt could be directly affecting what is happening in your body right now, as far as what your DNA capacity is, what you're being attracted to, what your sexual drive is. So it's a healing opportunity as we begin to understand what the sexuality actually is, what its connection to spirituality is, and how it is a very, very sacred energy. And that doesn't just mean it was meant to make babies. It can do that too. But it's also meant to be shared, first of all and foremost, with God's source, as a living, breathing circulation of energy. The greatest ecstasy you can ever experience, and no matter how good you get at sacred sex here, there's one thing you'll never, ever be able to quite experience with a physical body. And that's the level of ecstasy that is experienced when you go fully home into God's source as consciousness. It is the biggest orgasm you've ever seen. It's not just an little light gasm. It's a big gasm, right? It's the ecstasy, the ecstatic space. And you don't need to do sexual things in order to reach that state either. But if you start to reach spiritual ecstasy, don't be surprised if your private parts join you, and don't be embarrassed, because you may find they definitely respond. So anyway, I'm going to stop now, and I hope you have a very good evening and good morning, afternoon tomorrow. We will come together for 3 o'clock here, and I hope you understand why. I mean, if you've been with us for a while, you know why. You know that all day is spent getting ready because we're getting the live transmission down for what we're going to teach that evening. But if you're new, please just understand that we have to do it this way. Or you just end up pacing outside the door wondering why I'm not there at 10 o'clock, and wondering at 1 o'clock why I'm not there at 10 o'clock, and wondering at 4 o'clock why I'm not there at 10 o'clock. So it's easier this way. We'll do 3 o'clock tomorrow, 3 till 7, and then 7 till 9 will be dinner, then 9 to 11-ish will be the other part of tomorrow night's workshop. We'll probably do the same Sunday, but we'll try to wrap it up early enough where it's not an issue of people who have to leave on planes, for Monday morning. So thank you for joining us here in Denver, and see you tomorrow. Come in fast and now. So what we do have our 55 graphs back with no words on them, which is really fun, especially when it's new material where I have to remember everything that the words are supposed to be on them. We've got some of them set enough to show you where they're going. What's most important with the information tonight is to make the link between what we have known about Source, about our connection to Source through the light body, and particularly about where this all started with Partakai 1, what this has to do with tachyon cycles, because when it comes right down to the end of that journey, which is the journey of creation, when we get down to the end of that, it comes right down to your chakras and to your base chakra. And that's what we're going to be dealing with tomorrow. And we're going to be learning a technique that I don't know yet. They haven't told me, but they told me what it does. It begins to turn on what's called the crystal spiral in the entire chakra system. It's an accelerated activation. It's occurring because even though the grid work at Shasta was successful, there has been something that has occurred not to the indigo shield in the meantime that has to do with the rainbow bridge. And those of you who have been with the work know what that means. That's that middle path for those who couldn't make the leap to crystal spiral yet. And so they didn't get caught in the threshold Metatronic spiral and the full Wisadrak black hole fall that this planet is destined toward. Now, the rainbow bridge is not holding already. It's not because of anything that we're doing or the indigos are doing or not doing. It's because something that occurred between the Tothian Anunnaki groups and a particular group that are working with the Thetans that had a particular vengeance with them. And the Tothian shield is falling. There were a large percentage of those who are going to go into the Rainbow Bridge. So what we have are mainly the Jehovian Anunnaki groups and some of the Enochian Anunnaki groups left, as far as those being able to, if they're assisted out, possibly be able to make a link to the crystal spiral. So once again, we're going through a grid acceleration on this planet in order to assist those groups who can still hold and try to hold at least partial crystal. And that involves directly interfacing with the chakras. Now, even though that's Gridmaster stuff, and if you're not here for Gridmasters, that's okay, because the first part of the mastery of the grids is the mastery of your own body. And that's what the information that we're going to be covering in this workshop is about. We finally got around to being at this workshop because they were showing me how I kept saying, can't we just talk about the lower part of it? And they said, no, when you start out, that's why they wanted it in 3 different workshop blocks, where the first one we dealt with the creation science, your relationship to Source through your light body, how that applies to your chakras, and how those chakras and your Rishite spiral apply to the act of sexuality or the acts involved with sexuality. We are here. Tomorrow we're going to make the link between the chakras and the sexual aspect that will work our way down towards, so you see where all the other stuff fits in to those parts of your anatomy. Then we'll take it from there into understanding what those parts also have to do with what's called elemental command, and these elemental fields of consciousness that your body is literally composed of. And there's a whole lot of information coming through now. I think they're going to name the first 5 out of 12 elemental commands. I know at some point, and I don't know if it's going to be this workshop, but the information on elemental commands that starts with the graphs you'll soon see that have to do with the pulsing of the Taran and tachyon cycles, this information eventually culminates into what is the atomic table of elements, the real one, where we actually learn what there are actually 144 natural occurring, what would be called elements, that form the base atomic structure of this planet. So all of this, once it gets down to the point where it's anchored in 3D terms, why it's important to learn about tachyons, why it's important to understand where these spark pulse currents come from. It has to do with something called their encryption, which is the vibrational signature that they carry in the form of gelesic radiation points that when it comes down here, they are connected to what are called joules. Joules are what I believe they're in science here, they say there's about 4 point something or other joules equals 1 calorie, and 1,000 of those equals 1 kilocalorie. That's the thing you eat. All right, so our body is run on these things is what it comes down to. We're going to learn what the actual atomic table of elements really is, because what we're looking at now is the distorted one. It comes down to atomic numbers. How many protons and neutrons are in the nucleus of an atom determines its atomic number, which determines its placement on the periodic table of elements. There is a mutation in the elemental field on this planet, on the Earth level of the elemental field on this planet. However, that mutation does not extend to the Eartha field, and the Eartha field is the larger field within which the Earth field is presently residing. We are going to be taught how to turn back on the crystal spiral in relation to the natural atomic structure, and it will. What this is going to look like by the end is going to be basically we don't have to be here anymore, which means we will be able to take bodies out. This is the beginning of training for what's actually called the 12 tribes, for those who want to become part of the smaller groups we're going to do, where we actually start teaching people first to, as they're working with healing the body and getting it to the point where it can hold the Eartha elemental content, where it can clear the distortions in the atomic structure here. We're going to be training people progressively for the point in time when the Eartha gates open sufficiently where some of us will be able to be taken through and trained from there. And that will be really exciting, because it literally will be like walking through a hole in the sky or in the side of a mountain that nobody else saw, and you walk through with your body and you end up someplace else that seems like heaven compared to here. And it won't be heaven yet, it's just Eartha, and which is still way down here in density 1, right? But it's a far cry from where we've been for the last many, many, many millions of years on this planet. So all of this is all connected. Sexuality is directly connected to all of this, because it's one of the most confused and convoluted areas of life in human form on this planet. And it is because the mutation that is held in the sexual chakras, that babies are born with the mutation right in their fields, right in their DNA. This is a mutation that we now need to work with technologies to more rapidly clear. Now, some of the clearing is fun. Anybody that's getting the lava skin, where you just get these heat flashes and all of a sudden it feels like you have lava on your skin, and it's like, ow, ow, ow. Yeah, but they go away quick. But when they spike, they spike. That is part of the healing process. That is part of the purging process, where we are progressively going to be purging the Metatronic traces, Metatronic code from the Earth elemental kingdoms out of our bodies as we open the fields of the Eartha elemental kingdom into our bodies, which means we're upgrading the content of our atomic structure to the point where it can hold full base 12 atomic structure. Part of the way we're going to do this, and this is part of what we're going to be learning a little bit about tonight and a bit more about tomorrow, has to do with the elementals, which goes right back to the pulsing of the Taran and tachyon cycles, and it has to do with something called encryption, because there's a specific set of encryptions or core signatures that each level of the light body and each level of the chakras are naturally composed of in a base 12 Christic system. We can begin the process of very rapid healing of the chakra systems, working from the outside in, as it were, because we've been working from up, from out, way up in heaven down through, and slowly getting out to the flesh that we know and walk around in. But we can begin the healing process working both ways now, where we can use encryption itself directly and work with the chakras to re-encrypt their natural joule signatures into the chakras. It will begin rapid opening of the four-way horizontals, and the chakras have 6 vortices to them. They're not supposed to just have 2, one coming out the front, one coming out the back. There's another set coming out the side, and there's one large one going up and one large one going down. Right now, they're all messed up because of the Metatronic mess. We are going to learn how to re-encrypt the original encryption, The original encryption comes from the first Partakai that was ever born, and that's what this stuff is. And I'm not going to read all this to you, believe me, because we'll be here for 600 years. But I wanted to show you a progression. It's a progression of something that we are in the process of putting together. You'll see stuff that is in this condition, right? This is not even typeset yet. All right. The first stage is scratching it down somewhere. The second stage is getting it typeset. And the third stage is pulling that typeset apart and illustrating it, sometimes line by line by line, because sometimes the processes that are being explained are so detailed and so complex that you literally have to take 2 lines and make 3 pictures to explain and show what that means. Or else it's just a bunch of gobbledygook like this to anybody that's trying to understand what these processes are. These particular sequences that you'll see, you're not going to even see these fast. They're going to just flip by really quick. There's one diagram I want to kind of point to that eventually is going to be an actual diagram, and it'll have all sorts of neat things that make sense. It goes with this series. This series is the pre-birth series. This is the beginning place where thought in the consciousness of God Source became and becomes repeatedly the first Partakai. And from that stage where creation, eternal life creation, was literally born, and from that point literally is reborn continually because it's perpetual motion. We've covered bits and pieces of various things, particularly since Tenerife. We've been in February. We've been hit with tons and tons of information, so much that it's very, very hard to even get it in this form before the next wave of it comes through. And what's kind of scary about that is it's information we need to know how to do the next level of techniques that are necessary to keep up with the changes in the planetary grid so we don't get run over by the environmental influences of the Metatronic spiral that's activating in the planetary grids. So we have sequences. Hopefully by next year sometime you will see this sequence as the pre-birth and birth of Partakai sequence. Then after that, there's another sequence that is the birth of the triad. Then there's another sequence that is the birth of the Taran. Now, we've begun to put together the sequence that has to do with the creation or the birth of the Taran. It started with the first thought in the mind of Source that became the first Partakai and then the second Partakai. And through Partakai 1 and 2, we went into the next phase where Partakai 2, as its birthing splits Partakai 1, becomes the Partakai and the Partakai, and that begins the process of Partakai phasing, which is the process by which the eternal living light seed is created. Now, it's through phasing of the triad, that is the stage after these scratchy diagrams, that we get into the birth of the Taran. We talked about the Taran a bit ever since Tenerife, when they kind of hit us with this stuff about the Taran, and going, oh my God, what is this? How does this work? What is it? Well, we've got to the point where we know what the Taran is. We even know how it was created. It is from that point that you can see what something called the Kristalla, or the Christ Allah pattern, is an encryption that is held by this core first light unit. It's the living light seed called the Taran. Understanding the Taran is important, not just because you have one in your body, but you also have several smaller ones that aren't called Tarans. They're called, I don't know what the name of them is, probably the Moda Ettore complex that we talked about ages ago, that's all connected with this, the male within the female within the male. But we all have a Taran living light unit. It is the first point where this body entered manifestation in preconception. Before you were actually conceived in the flesh, there was a point where you were conceived in the spirit. And from that point, the flesh was born. And that is part of the conception process here. But there's also this process that takes place with understanding the Taran. It is not just people that have a Taran. Everything in manifestation originally started with a Taran light seed. Right now on the planet, when beings come in and incarnate here, they immediately have a reversed upside-down Taran, because that is what the planetary Taran is carrying because of the mutations in the planetary grids and the electromagnetic fields on the planet. So what we have already done, and the people who are just beginning to come into this work, you're fortunate in one way, because there's people that have, for the last 5 years, have been doing a lot of work to bring up the DNA activation levels and the shield activation levels in order to be able to proceed with these type of activations. If you're coming in now with a group of people like this, where you have the majority of them who have been working with these technologies for a while, particularly with those who have done the techniques from Tenerife and Phoenix, Easter, and Shasta, there is a really high activation level that will actually help you to gain and hold temporarily the activation levels that we are going into now, we are going into what is called the rebirth of the monad within the time period that we are here. It's sometime tomorrow. They didn't tell me what time yet, probably in the evening, but it is the next phase in what is called a tachyon cycle. It is a key generation cycle. We have been going through a series of these ever since I believe it was Tenerife was the first one. Now, it's been a bit vague trying to explain, okay, how many of these are there? When do we get done with this? What exactly is it? All right, we're making keys. Great, and keys become tachyons. Okay. Right. There's a lot of pieces in that sequence of knowledge that have been needed. And that is why, as far as when I finally kind of wrote out and said, help me sequence this. We have bodies of information on huge amounts of things. Everything from history to first creation mechanics to physics. You know, can you please show me the story? Like, where's page 1? And they said, we start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. So we started almost at the beginning. This is the beginning. We haven't got to those graphs yet because I can at least explain to you there is a set of processes by which a particle is born. And when that particle is born, another one follows right after it, and that sets in motion the particle phasing process by which eternal life, living light creation is made. From there, we can jump really fast to the Taran, because by understanding the Taran, you start to understand something called the Gelesic states. These are states of pre-manifestation. They're before pre-matter. We're not even talking pre-matter. It's the Gelesic states that are behind the pre-matter. These are the borderline between being still at one with the consciousness field that is the non-manifest body of Source and making that step into the manifestation arena. So if we begin to understand these Gelesic states, if we begin to understand something called Urs and Rus, right? These are actually units of measure of stored electrical potential. And they are very specific. And believe me, this has been crazy because we haven't had time to put them on graphs or anything yet. But I finally have got them. I've even got the how many units of stored electrical potential are in a Ru or in an When you combine that, subtract this from that, you get a joule. And a joule should be this, but with the mutation, it's actually this down here. And there's like a variance somewhere in there. The phi ratio fits in, and you know that which is a mutation on what's supposed to be the Jaffa ratio. And it's yeah. I mean, all of this plugs in to what we're walking around in very, very technically in 3D terms. It plugs into the heavy science. But you don't need to know all the heavy science. What's most important to know is that if you can understand a bit more about what a tachyon cycle is, first of all, you'll understand what it means to be assembling keys and understand how keys eventually become tachyons and how tachyons eventually become spark pulse currents. Right? Spark pulse currents are currents of quark-like structures that flow at certain times outward from the core, from the first creation point, and all the way out to the outer domains of creation where we are actually, our reality field is actually in. And we can begin the process of bringing those spark pulse currents from first creation back through the body, and this is what it means to make the crystal connection. It is beginning the full activation of the crystal spiral within the body. The crystal spiral is important because it is a spiral of energies that come out from the core, from the first creation point, where you left Source as a Gestalt consciousness. You are actually a huge family of consciousness. And you have worked your way out and had to break yourself into more and more pieces, right, to get into the more outer levels of density in order to be able to experience a hologram with space, time, and matter that are characteristic of outer domains. So there is a point, though, that all of us have, way back through all those identities, where there is one little signature in the private encryption that was that of your family of consciousness. You'll have that encryption of your family of consciousness, but there's one little piece of that is just you. And by reawakening the encryption of our family of consciousness, by reawakening the natural core encryptions within the levels of the light body structure, we will be able to find the line that will allow that one little piece of us to connect with the rest of what it wrote out on. And that will allow the backflow currents, the backflow return currents, they're called, to come back out into the body. So it is a rapid acceleration, opening to Source process that we're involved in. It's important to understand tachyons, too, if you ever want to understand elementals, if you ever want to understand really what elemental command is about, which I am just learning about, too. I know I've known this in other lives, and I've actually been heads of elemental commands before, but I can't remember a darn thing at this point, not from here. And it's because the information has actually been blocked. It's not really been allowed on the planet for a long time. Because once you learn to tell atoms what to do and they actually listen, if you don't have really good spiritual manners, you could really cause a lot of harm, as certain beings have proven on this planet. So we're going to learn about some of the... We're going to go really quick through these stages. I'm just going to whip these by just to show you that this is stuff that's coming in a set of graphs. That would be stage 1. Stage 2 would be a set of graphs that I'll really quickly breeze by. They have to do with the birth of the triad, and then really fast to the birth of the Tarn. And that's where you'll get in to see some of the new graphs we've been working on. And some of them are updates of old graphs, but you'll see the first 5 anyway have words where you'll see the detail that is going into these. What we're trying to do is prepare this information in writing, and it is the real creation story. All right? It is I won't even insult it by calling it the Bible, honestly, or any of the other holy books here, because this is the information, the true Christian teachings, the crystal teachings. These are the teachings Christianity was taken from. These are the teachings that Buddhism was taken from. They're the ones that Islam was taken from. All of those things. That's where we have Allah, we have Buddha, we have Christ, we got Kristalla, we got them all. All right? They're all part of this body of teachings. And one day before we leave this place, we will leave at least the sequence from once there was a Partakai in the mind of God. God thought about having a Partakai and then did this, right? And that's how this occurred. Because the same process by which Source created creation is the same process that occurs every time we think a thought. But we don't know it. So we're creating unconsciously. And we're creating more and more messes. And now we have lots of elemental things stuck in our bodies because other people created messes on our planet. And our creation is out of control. And we feel out of control and imprisoned in our body. If we ever want to live in a reality field that is not like this, did you ever think about how... what is running this planet? Do you ever think about how anti-Christian the morals are that are used by most world governments? And the more modern countries are supposedly the advanced ones. That's frightening, right? Because the corruption is so almost to the core here that people think it's normal. They don't even remember there's anything different. And the more awake and aware you get, the more horrendous you will look at this and go, I can't stand it here. There's one saving grace in this. It's not dive off off a spaceship now and just, annihilate yourself. That's not the answer. Because by being here, you can help to get the gates open so you don't have to be here anymore and you don't have to dump a body to do it. You can take one with you. There are places that don't operate like this. There are places where love and peace and people getting along with each other and no such thing as war, all of that stuff that we think of as utopia actually does exist. And it is a free will society. It is egalitarian form of government. It is not gender biased. It is not elitist. There is a lovely model of Christian creation. And it's very close. It's in the Eartha fields, which are, they have something to do with the, what do they call them, the Van Allen radiation belts, I believe, are connected to the buffers between this reality field of Earth and the larger one around it called Eartha. So we're going to begin the process of learning what we need to do in order to start going through the gates, because they are opening the gates of Eartha to those who can and desire to come through and who are holding the truth of Christian intention in their hearts and in their deeds. Because you can't lie to Christian races, because they know, they feel your encryption. If you're trying to put one over on them, they'll know. Do you think they're going to let you in? Do you think they're going to say, oh, sure, walk through that gate, no problem, come on in and take over my world? No. The gates themselves won't allow you through. You don't need a guard on those gates, because if your encryption is not coherent with the high frequencies in those places and the balance in frequency, which means balance in consciousness in those places, you'll get hurt going through gates. And that's why they're training us how to do it. Because by the time we do, we'll be able to go physically through gates. We will also have the understanding of nothing else is worth anything. It is not worth breaking the rules of creation in order to see how far you can stretch free will, because all you end up doing is ending up on a black hole planet where you just about lose the ability to ever go back home, and you realize how precious the original gift was. So we will get there with the activations that we're progressively doing, and it starts with this stuff. Now this stuff is all about, from the first idea, how that actually gelled, and it was set. The first idea has one thing important about it. It was a focus of consciousness, where Source actually, in its own consciousness field that you could call the mind of God had a thought. It wasn't a thought in linear words, but it was a point of focused intention. And that created an oscillation and an imprint of something. The focus of it's almost like if you have a diffused light that is everywhere, and then a part of that light turns into like a laser-like beam and just focuses at one point in that great field of light. And because of that laser-like intensity, it starts making a change in the light itself, and it starts to gel. This is where we get the beginning of the Jalizic states. Now, the first focus of consciousness of Source within itself, within its mind, within the mind of Source, creates an imprint that is carried on the light of its attention. All right, the part of the light that Source turned into a laser-like beam or focus of consciousness, stream of consciousness, carries what is called an encryption in the form of tiny little points of living radiation. It is the encryption that Source itself holds. It is the living eternal life encryption, because there wasn't a point where Source was born. Source was, and always will be. It is an eternal consciousness, intelligent consciousness field. Now, the first encryption has to do with rus and ers. The first encryption is held in points. They have a specific quantum of energy, stored electrical potential, and they have a positive electrical charge. This is the beginning of understanding states of matter and prematter and before prematter, because we have original encryption, we have eternal encryption, and these all mean something in terms of the types of units that are formed. Now, in the formation of the first particle that all this material will tell you about in deathly detail, this is like, a month's worth of work just to do this series of 5 pages and do them properly in graphs. But there is, if we can understand that at this point, where the creation story first starts, where the first particle is conceptualized before it's even born, there is the first encryption that is set. It is the eternal encryption of Source, and it is carried in a set of 12. This is where the base 12 Chris code eventually comes from. But Source imprinted, with just the attention of its consciousness, an imprint of itself. All right? In making the first particle, before the particle was born, it created an imprint, an image of its own energy signature. That imprint is called the eternal encryption. Now, first particle, before it was born, when it was first conceived, was actually in what's called the image of Source, where it holds the same encryption as, or same set of Jalizic points of radiation in the specific mathematical order that Source itself holds. So that is the eternal encryption. It is the image of Source. In the process of birthing that particle one, however, from taking it from just a coagulating thought field and into a form of movement, it's actually a form of movement that causes it to turn around within the same place that it is, but turn around and move outside of the original area of focus that Source had focused on to create that area that gelled. And when it moved out of that area of focus and then back into it, it turned around and it reversed encryption from the top to the bottom. So you have first the eternal encryption of Source, which would have, let's say, if it looked like a Cathara grid or a tree of life grid, its top point at the top, that would be the eternal encryption that Source is like, right, the image of. And in the birthing process, that turns around and becomes what's called the original encryption for manifestation, which is the top down. This gives you right there 2 distinctions that become distinctions of matter, distinctions between atomic and etheric matter. And it's from those distinctions that all sorts of other things are born, including the Tauran, each of them carrying a specific combination of the eternal and the original encryption. When you put the eternal and the original encryption together into one form, and that one form becomes what is called the partikey that forms at the center of the Tauran light unit that we'll see in a minute. When you do that, you get what is called the Christ code, or the Christ code, K-R-Y-S-T code. And it is the encryption of eternal life manifestation, where the other is where we have the original and eternal encryption. They are the encryptions for eternal life creation, where the Christ code is for eternal life creative manifestation. So it's not just creating, but it's creating into the manifest arena, which is the beginning of the starborn process. So we are all a part of this. What you're going to see you can interpret the information we cover on a macrocosmic level or a microcosmic level, because it applies to every unit, every particle, and it also applies to every massive cosmos that exists within the manifest body of God. Within the manifest body of God, which exists within the mind of God, it started with the first Partakai, and it moved itself through these phases into becoming the Christ code, which from there became the starborn life cycle process. They called it the starborn budding process, because first reproduction happens through the process called budding. That's different than, let's say, what we know here is sexual procreation. But Source procreates itself, and so do there certain life forms, even on this planet. They tend to be aquatic, I believe, and microscopic and deep sea, but they still spawn by themselves, and they kind of replicate themselves by a process that's known as budding. I think some also can regrow limbs and those kind of things through that same process. The process of budding in its full form is the process of quantum replication. Natural quantum replication through the Christ code implies that a certain quantum was given, and that quantum can interact with itself and create sparks. And as long as those sparks can return back to the original source of creation, then the original source of creation will send forth an equivalent ratio of quantum back. So there's a constant give and take, a flow and a backflow of energy. It's called a backflow. If original quantum is given, say the first Partakai are born, and then they spark and they send a backflow spark or a set of quantums back to source. That process of sending back through the creation point, the backflow sparks, giving back to source, keeps the creation point open, and source turns the energy around and brings more out. And it replicates. Where there was 3, next there become 6, next there become 12, and next there become 24, then 48, then 144, then 1728, then 20,736. All right? There's a particular ratio of expansion. This is what we refer to as the starborn cycle, and you'll see what those look like, what those graphs look like in a minute, that show you the progressive expansion of creation, first as light, from the first living light unit, that is the Taran. And if we can remember now, before I just kind of ditch the rest of these, there's 5 of these. You don't need to look at them. It just shows you where this starts at, right? What the condition of this mess is when it first starts. But these will take you to birth of the Triad and then the birth of the Taran. And we will jump from these now to the birth of the Taran. I'm just going to, so you can probably see where they start. Can you? Let me see. Yeah, we can just whip through those real fast just so you can see them go by. Yeah. See, this is all the stuff that has to be typeset. Yeah, just one and take it down. See, there's these little graphs that will become full graphs, probably sets of graphs, where it's explaining actually how the stream of consciousness within the body of Source actually created a gelling of the light field that Source is made of itself, right? So this is all about the first Partakai and how that was first conceived before it was born. So there's that. Keep going. Then there's all sorts of really intense graphs and lots of words that go with this set. So there is this sequence of from the thought or an idea in the mind of God Source, and how that became the first Partakai and the second Partakai, and how that became the eternal life cycle. All right, so these will fit in eventually. Someday we're going to have a heck of a book, all right, if we ever get time to write it and finish the graphs. Yeah, so see, these are all the things we're working on. The stuff you'll see next was in this condition for quite a while, and you'll see how it progressively evolves and becomes coherent. So we're going to see some graphs, at least some of them have words, and you'll see what this will look like eventually. And then after 5 of those, we didn't have any more time to put the words on. So you'll see the pictures, but they're at least in good form, and they're not scribbled all over like sometimes the graphs are. Right? There's a process. We're still in from thought to the first Partakai. In this series, we also get the birth of electricity and the el-ek-tarayasati, and we get the sound of one hand clapping. That actually begins with the Partakai, with the Partaki. So we have to come down a little bit further. But this is literally from the Jaleesic states that form from the focused energy of the consciousness of God Source within the body of light that is itself. You actually have the birth of electricity, light, sound, electromagnetism, and all the primal forces that any primal subconscious unit, any quark, comes from. All right, so we're still in Partakai starting to take shape as it's starting to gel. This is where Urs and Rus come in, where the encryption is getting set. And Urs are actually the image of, and then the Rus are the reversal of it. And they have a different quantum. And then there's a ratio that happens between them. And these actually have numbers, which is rather frightening, because an I believe, has, what is it, 33, I think it's 33 and a third units of stored positive electrical potential, positive charge electrical potential. And a Ru has half that, I believe. It has, 33, no, it has 11 and 2/3 negative electrical potential, stored electrical potential. Now, it's interesting, there's a whole series of understanding Urs and Rus that goes with this part that has to do with something called a quantum differential. And that is the difference between the 33 and a third and the 11 and 2/3. If you subtract the smaller one from the larger one, it gives you a 21 and 2/3, I believe, quantum differential. These numbers are actually the numbers that you won't see them when we get to the later graphs because I didn't have time to even plug those in, but they go with what you will see is how many fire letters, how many kilonosparks does it take to make a kilon? How many kilons does it take to make a fire letter? How many fire letters does it take to make a key? How many keys does it take to make a tachyon? And how many tachyons does it take to create the birthing cycle, to allow the winds of what are called the winds of Alais and all the other winds that represent each stage of the starborn cycle. These are all quantum building winds, and we are progressively activating keys now in our bodies, in our shields, in our DNA, in our light bodies, so it helps to understand what they are. So we're still kind of scrolling by all this. We're still at the conception of the first Partakai. Okay, next one, please. We'll just get on to something coherent. So eventually that will be a nice, neat thing, too. Whoop, we're still on those. There's more. Let's just keep going with those. All of this data, all the new words. I mean, we need a dictionary like this thick at this point. So this you will see eventually in form where you can understand what that process was about as far as how the thought gelled into become the first Partakai. We need to get past this quick because we're going to be here for 6 years if we try to read all of that. Now, Now, we've seen this one before, but we haven't seen it in terms of me talking about it in relation to right after I talked about Rus, Urs, and the eternal encryption that were the points of Jaleesic radiation that in the consciousness beam of Source within itself set an imprint, or the original encryption, within a part of its own consciousness field that began the gelling of the first Partakai, the conception of the first Partakai. When we talked about the encryption, the first encryption is the base 12 crystal code encryption. All right, it has 12 Cathara centers. This is what we call the Cathara grid for anybody who might not know. And it's also called the Tree of Life, but that's usually the people who are teaching Metatronic science call it that, and it's shaped differently. The proportions of this are very exacting, and the proportions control everything from how different types of units interact with each other to how much quantum they hold to whether or not they can spark and send backflow sparks back to Source. And if they cannot, whatever the creation is that deviates from this pattern for too long will be unable to have living circulation flowing anymore between the manifest state and the Source consciousness field in the non-manifest state. What that means is it will become a finite life structure and a finite light structure that will eventually crash and burn within itself. You can't escape from God's source body, but what you can do is end up in black hole fall, which means you will have the ability of your light body will no longer be able to phase, which means no longer spark. It will not be able to send backflow sparks to Source, and therefore it will not be able to get quantum replication and regeneration, backflow return sparks from Source. So what is happening on this planet right now is this planetary field, but not just this planetary field. A good part of this solar system and this galaxy and this Vecca, which I won't get into that now because that's more Gridmaster stuff, but it's a huge system that is going into the final death throes of its black hole fall. And this has been going on for a very long time, quite a few billions of years actually, and this is the final phase. And we don't all have to join that fall. And that's what the work is about at this point, learning enough about the physics of creation to regenerate the life spark in ourselves. So when that point in time comes, which is called the starfire point, we will be able to ride the currents of the crystal spiral up into ascension into the Eartha field that is still capable of ascension, of being a natural ascension planet. A natural ascension planet is capable of going back into source for a natural regeneration cycle and popping back out again into manifestation. So we are preparing for that. So I'll start with encryption. When I talk about encryption, imagine each one of those points in that Cathara grid of the original encryption, with the top one being 12. The original would be the top one being 12. They're all little points of Jalesic radiation, or actually they're just radiation points to begin with, but they start to gel as source concentrates a beam of energy in one area of its mind, the mind that is the field, the consciousness field of source. So we start there. These were, we talked about a long time ago, when we started to talk about Partakai. We have Partakai 1 was there. That was the first point when it was created, and that was after the whole process of when it started out as eternal encryption and then had to go through the birthing process and ended up as the original encryption for manifestation, which is with its top down. Right? Once Partakai 1 was here, then Partakai 2 actually filled up with more source energy from the void that was left from the place where Partakai 1 had originally been, and in that process Partakai 2 births into the center of Partakai 1, splitting Partakai 1 into a Partakam and a Partakai, and these two phase together and they spark, and that is the whole process. That's the beginning, that's the core meaning that we learned a long time ago about how sparks are made. Sparks collect and make what are called chelons. Chelons collect into groups that are called fire letters or chelon sequences, fire letter sequences. And this whole process begins with the first encryption that's held within the first Partakai, its reversal, and then the birth of the first and second Partakai, to where you have an original encryption that is an upside down version of the eternal encryption. All right, next one, please. I am not going through every one of these phases. This is to show you another part. It's almost like chapter 2 in the creation, the creation of the universe, right? The first one was the thought field and how the first Partakai and second Partakai were born. There are 2 pages of this stuff. It shows you the first 12 actions of first creation. Starting with where you had, over here somewhere. Right. Yeah, where you had Partakai 1, right? There was a process by which you had Partakai 1, Partakai 2 came through it, split it into a Partakam and a Partakai. Partakam has a negative charge, Partakai has a positive charge. So Partakai 2 took the place of Partakai 1 split, but Partakai 1 comes back together, phases, sparks, and this is the process. I'm not going to go through each of these painful stages. It's painful because these are really, really hard. I haven't even got all the words on these, but they show you the process. The circles are all proportionate. Right? If you have, say, a 360 full circulation quantum is the quantum of stored electrical potential of a Partakai, and that equals a certain quotient, right? And you take that and, okay, Partakai 1 splits, and it splits into 2 equal parts. Which means you got, if you had a 360, it split into 2 equal parts, you got 2 180s. Which means if you have a circle this big, when you're drawing the next bit where it splits, you have to make sure that they're half that size. It is very difficult to draw a lot of these graphs because everything has to be in proportional relationship to each other, or it just completely distorts what the, hello. Hi. Even typesetting for hours and doing paste ups, bless them. So anyway, this set of graphs that I believe we introduced this in Tenerife, shows from the process of Partakai 1, Partakai 2 getting birth and splitting, to beginning the sparking process, where the PCM, the PKA, or the Partakai and the Partakam come back together and spark. Now, what's interesting, in that first encryption and in that second encryption, the first encryption is the eternal encryption and the second encryption is the original encryption, there are particular vibration signatures. Now, vibration signatures create what would be sound. These are pre-sound sounds. These are very deep core sounds, but if you were to translate them into sounds that we could hear here, each one of these units and particles has a name. All right. When we have when we're talking about just these 2 phases, we have what's called the umae. All right. We have, I think it was the is a certain creation point flame that's called the variable constant that opens in the center point where the first Partakai is created, the eternal creation point at the center there. The refers to the void space that is left behind when Partakai 1 births, and Partakai 2 comes in to fill the void, and then there's a dynamic that takes place. So you have the flame at the center, the A refers to Partakai 2, and the UN refers to Partakai 1. So these are sound tones. This is where we get some of the, when we use the different sound tones in the Anahazi and other sacred languages, we are activating those tones in order to activate these encryptions within the shield and within the body. So in this one, where we have Partakai 2 is born, splits Partakai 1, the UN, becomes the Ha and the La vibration signature encryption. Okay? When they come together and spark, they become the Hala spark. Okay? Now that spark is, when they first come together, when any Partakai unit first comes together and they spark, they will create what is called a backflow spark, which means it's a spark that's going back to source first. Right? They spark, the spark happens here, and it goes upward, and it carries the two reunited pieces of Partakai 1, carries them back up into source. Spark goes back up into source. Partakai 1 goes back up into source. Then source kicks out what's called a backflow return spark. Now, if Hala was the spark that went up, the encryption sound was Hala, when it reverses, turns around, it becomes the AH-AL, AAH, the Allah. All right? So this is where we get the name Allah first. It is the first backflow return spark from the first backflow spark, from the first phase of the first Partakai of first creation. Now, the backflow return sparks form eternal standing wave consciousness fields. All right? So each one of these little balls that you see here are actually a consciousness cell that is an identity that is conscious and directly connected very closely in regard to these to source consciousness. So you would have the first backflow return spark called backflow return is the Allah spark. Now that also has specific characteristics. It happens to be an atomic spark because when Partakai 1 is the one that splits, it will form what is called the atomic matter base. When Partakai 2 splits, it upsplits, where if you notice Partakai 1, when it splits down. That's called down phasing. All right? That will create atomic sparks, which have certain characteristics. When we get through with the Hala spark going back into source, Partakai 1 going back in with it, them coming back out, the Allah being born, the Allah standing wave spark being born, the process of the backflow return spark coming back out from source causes Partakai 2 to split and polarize. But what that does is, as the backflow return spark comes down this way, causes Partakai 2 to upsplit or to upphase. And that creates a different quality in the resonance of the matter, and that becomes what are called the etheric matter states. So right here, at the very first beginning of the first few movements, or not even movements yet, the actions of creation, we are getting the seeding of what become the matter types, that become different densities of matter, that become different types of quarks, up quarks, down quarks, charmed quarks, all those kind of quarks. Quarks are sparks in the manifest form in the densities here. Quarks would be the backflow return sparks, where Kilana sparks would be the sparks that go back to source, and then the return, or backflow return, would be the quarks. So this is the process by which quarks and things that are even, let's say, more deeper into creation than quarks. But let's say the forefathers of quarks and foremothers of quarks. All right, we're talking about these sparks. This is the process by which everything originally enters manifest creation. So we have the Allah. The Hala spark makes the Allah on the down phase. It's an atomic spark because it's on down phase. Then when it comes back out, when the Allah spark comes back out, it splits Partakai 2. Partakai 1 resumes the place of the center creation point. Partakai 2 up splits. All right. Partakai 2 is the Ba, B-A, encryption tone, and Da. All right. They come together. They create the Ba-Da, backflow return spark, or backflow spark. The Ba-Da comes back in, goes back into source through creation point, through the flame at creation point, and source sends back out a backflow return spark. And just like the Hala became the Allah, the Ba-Da becomes the Abada. Right? The AAH on the end refers to having passed through the void. All right? The eternal internal void. So this is where we got the first two backflow return sparks. We've got the Allah and we've got the abada. Somewhere down in here, they go through different, we get that far. Then the process of, every time a backflow return spark is sent back out, it creates the condition of splitting the particle that's holding the central position. So it initiates another phasing, right? Which initiates another sparking, which initiates another phasing, which initiates another sparking, and it goes on forever and ever and ever. All right, so we've got the first two phases. The first two phases create the first two backflow sparks, backflow return sparks, and then we're finally getting to the tarn. Through all these things that we don't have to go through, but you can see how just to get to the first phasing of the first two particle, like the first particle unit, before we even get to the tarn, all of these diagrams were needed to show the first 12 actions, all right? And if that wasn't bad enough, next one, please. Or there were still more. Right? We're still not to the Taran yet, right? So this is why, and this is how this material comes in transmission. We don't get cliff notes. We don't get summary sheets. You have to analyze the entire and record the entire data flow, and then try to categorize it and pull it. And if it all came in sequence, it'd be a lot easier. Anyway, we're still not quite at the at the Taran yet. I want to show you something too. The next one, please. Those we saw before were the first 12 actions of creation. And while the actions are taking place, the first 12 movements were also taking place. And the movements each of those actions are taking place on a different axis, where there's a rotation that occurs, every movement, every spark that takes place. So you have the first 12 movements and the first 12 actions, and through all of those things, you get to what is called the birth of the Taran. And in simple terms, you have the Allah spark that forms on the down phase. I'm just going to use any one of these drawings just to illustrate it. And this is one of the diagrams I wanted to get done for today to start, at least lead into this, but there was just no time. It was more important to get some of the other ones done. But let's just say we have down here the spark that was the first atomic from particle 1 splitting, down spark, right? That is the Allah backflow return spark. That caused the splitting of particle 2, which then formed the spark up here, the etheric spark, which actually it formed the spark here, the Bada spark. The Bada spark came back in here. We got the Allah Bada, body of Allah, right? Then the Bada came back in here, made the Abada spark, which is the etheric, the first etheric spark. So you have the first spark of the particle, the first return spark of the particle, the second return spark of the particle, and then something very interesting happens. Because right now, they're just kind of shifting this way and this way, where if a backflow return spark comes down here, it causes the other unit that's still whole behind it to split up. And if it's a backflow return spark coming out this way, it causes the unit that's here to split down. So it's just splitting up and down at that point. But what happens if you try to make another spark here and you've already got Allah sitting there? This is where something really interesting happens. This is where it would probably take me 25 different things to show the 6 movements involved with it. But what occurs is, again, you have the first phase is a down phase where particle 2 births through particle 1, splits particle 1 makes the Hala, then the Allah. The process of Allah being born splits particle 2 that had taken the place of particle 1. Particle 1 takes place of particle 2 as particle 2 splits. You got the second spark here. And the fact of the second spark being born again splits particle 1. So here we go again. We're going to have another atomic spark, right? And it's going to try to come down on the same firing line as the first one did, because they're just rotating. They're just doing the 90 degrees rotation. So what happens when particle 1 splits for the second time? It comes together, sparks Hala again. It sends the Hala spark back up and remerges itself, but sends the Hala spark back up into source, and then source brings down again, sends down again another backflow return, what would be another Allah, except Allah bumps in to Allah, and it causes the Allah third one, the third spark, to actually reverse, and it becomes the Allah. All right? So we end up with it reverses, but it also makes it shift this way as the two of the same charge actually hit each other. They have a polarity reaction, electrical polarity reaction. It causes them to push away from each other. This one reverses because it wasn't all the way out yet, so it wasn't as strong as the Allah that was already there. Becomes the Allah over here. The Allah shifts over this way. And something interesting happens at the same time, of course. You've got Partakai 2 doing its split because there was a birth coming down here, right? And whenever the backflow return spark is coming out, it causes the other one to split. So at the same time that you have the Alas bumping into each other, spark 1 and 3 bumping into each other, you have spark 2 already sitting up there, and you have the split that would normally form spark 4. With all of this happening and shifts happening where there's actually a momentum generated that pushes these two apart, but then once this one reverses, they start to draw back together again because the polarities aren't opposite anymore. They are opposite. They're not same polarity where they repel each other. But what would have been the Ba and the Da split of Partakai 1, these actually get whacked and pulled this way where they go in a horizontal axis and rotate inward, right? And form a central circulation. And it's that central circulation that forms what is called the Partaki, or the Inaka. Now, I'll show you, this is through all these processes. Now I'll show you the diagram where it shows those balls in the right place. All right, I hope it's the next one, please. Still at the top. Here we go. There's the beginning of the new diagrams with all the words and all of those things. What that series of 12 first actions and 12 first movements created is what is called the Taran. It is the living light seed. It has the Ala spark, which was the first backflow return spark 1 from the first sparking of Partakai 1 when it split and sparked and sent its backflow up and its backflow return came out. So you have Ala. These all have categorizations. This one's a Manet primal force. It's atomic positive. It's called photonegative, right? It's the original encryption, which is the reflection of source. Now, I had to get these straightened out because they were driving me crazy before. Who's the reflection? Who's the image of? Who's on first with all this stuff? Because it's very, very precise. So this is the updated information. When I first began to introduce this, I remember saying, I think this is what they are, but I'm not exactly sure, but I know this is Allah, right? So we're getting more and more fine-tuned on the information that applies to each of these parts. You have backflow return spark 1 here, Allah. It is atomic because it was made from the splitting and phasing of Partakai 1. Up here, I won't even get into the fact that if it's Partakai 1, originally started with the eternal encryption, then it reversed to become the original encryption, and when it makes return backflow sparks to go back to source, I believe they carry the original encryption, and then the backflow return sparks come back out backwards, upside down, so they carry the eternal encryption. I mean, it's back and forth and back and forth. It's something like that. I think I said that wrong, but you get the idea of how hard it is to track these movements. It can take you 20 years to track the first 6 movements. But we have the Allah spark here. Now, these are cells of consciousness within the first thing that's called the living light seed. So we went from just sparks that were happening in and through this Partakai number 1 and Partakai 2 to the Allah, to number 2, which is the etheric spark. It was created by the up phase, or the splitting of Partakai 2, when the birth of this one occurred. Remember, this one birthed down this way, and it didn't come over here until this one was born and hit it and whacked it over that way. All right, so this was the one that was here. All right, this was Allah. It was born originally on that line and then shifted over this way. And then we got the Abada, which was from the Ba and the Da backflow spark, and the return, which is the reverse of that into the Abada. Okay, and then we have the third one here, which is the Ale. Now, it was another Allah coming in. It had the same polarity, same positive electrical charge as the Allah would have had. I think it's positive, yeah. I have to read these through to make sure, that I had written them right. But anyway, this is where the second Allah coming bumped into the first, and they pushed away from each other, and it reversed the spin on this one. So it actually created another atomic spark, because it's from the split of Partakai 1, but it's an atomic that has a negative electrical charge, where the Allah has a positive atomic electrical charge. But they're still both atomic. But one is positive electrical, one is negative electrical. This has to do with not only original versus eternal encryption, but how many Rus and how many Ers are holding that encryption. Because I believe there's something, I'm not sure what it's called, but it is a quantum of 15. And an is that, whatever it's called, 15, times 2 plus 3 1/3, which is the divine constant that has to do with the flame at the center. And where you have ruse, you have times 1, 15, minus 3 1/3, and it gives you 11 2/3, and that's where you get the ratios of how much quantum is being stored. And all that has to do later with keys and joules and how much frequency your body's running on when you come down to here. So anyway, we have the Allah, we have the Abada, and here we have the Ale, the 2 atmic and the 1 etheric units. They all have specific primal forces. The Ale carries the Ire primal force. The Allah carries the Mane primal force. And the encryptions, I won't even get heavily into this, but here's where, when you see in Kathara 2.3 manual, we talk about photo-negative and photo-positive. We talk about, later, ethos and eros and all these other strange currents. Where are these? Where do they start? Where do they come from? Here. They start from here with the first 2 types of currents, the atmic and the etheric. There is photo something or other. Lost the word there. Reversed. Yeah, anyway, we'll get into these at a different time, but I want you to see where encryption comes from, what it has to do with, to understand that the encryption held in these is held in little points of Jaleesic units. And at the center here, something interesting happens. That is when this interaction of all those steps that it would take a lot of diagrams to show what happened when the second Allah tried to birth and whacked this one over here, it reversed, then they pulled back together. It caused this one to bounce up and down, and that created sparks in the center. And the 2 that had split from Partakai 2 that would normally have phased up, phased down to the side and pulled together in the center and formed this. And this is called the Partaki. Okay? Now these 3 are Partakai sparks. A Partaki is different in one sense. It carries 2 things. One, it carries the ability to photogenerate. It is a photogenerator living light unit. It also carries what is called where's the encryption in here? Okay. The Christ Allah, eternal plus original encryption. It carries both of them. All right, so that is the core crystal program. That is the beginning of the program for manifestation, for eternal life manifestation. But the eternal plus original encryption creates what is called catheric matter. All right, so we had atomic, then we have from the ones, we have from spark 2 the etherics, and then spark 1 and 3 are atomic. 2 is etheric, 3 is catheric. That is carrier of what's called the Manu force. All of these have different names, like the Cristale, all right? They call this the Ina Ka. They call these the 3 Ina, all right? When we do the toning, the Umae, they told you about, Tre Ina E, right? You got the Tre Ina E. And the Ekasha is, there's in the there is something called the diamond door, which has to do with something called the nada or, and there is a little EC, X spark, that forms there. And then there's another thing that has to do with Jaleesic states that we'll see in a minute that is called the Ka field. And then something that, because of those and the interactions that take place within this Partaki unit, there's something called the Shah. And the Ekka Shah is the living ovum of living light, from which light, electromagnetism, consciousness expressing in the form of electromagnetism, and life are created. We all have this core encryption in our bodies. We all started with this core encryption. Now, I won't go into all the little words. I just want you to see that they're there, and this detail will be forthcoming at some point. But this is where all of the 55 graphs that follow this we would like to get them there, but there's no way, especially when they had our suitcases lost until yesterday. You know, because the art was done on Mylars, waiting for just word overlays to be put in. But the Mylars didn't show up. They weren't here because they were lost in the suitcase. So we'll get them eventually. I just want you to see where it's going. We started at the top with a thought. We're now down to the point where we got the living light unit. All right, living light unit is important because this is where the beginnings of the elemental consciousness are coming from. We'll deal with this a little bit more tomorrow because I'm going to take you back to this. After we get through a bunch of other stuff tomorrow, I'm going to take you back to this to connect it to the information they're just giving, and I have more graphs to do tonight. In the morning, it's already morning, right? Where it connects into the elemental command and the consciousness fields that are some of the core consciousness fields, or let's say probably the first 5 elementals. Because I believe it works that there are 12 elementals and they create elements. They create the 12 elementals, and they each create 12 elements, and each of the 12 elements each create 12 actuaries, whatever that is. So I'm looking forward to finding this out, but this is the information we need to understand if we want to start to understand what elemental command is, what are these elemental forces running through our body, and that are very much a part of whatever we encounter when we have relationships in any form, including sexuality. So anyway, next one, please. We'll go on from there to, here we go. Yeah, this is showing the beginning of, can I see the title, please, Ann? Thank you. The 15-layer ovum of living light within the Taran. Now, this is still the Taran unit, the first light unit. All right, this area here, that center ball, right, is the Pardaki unit. Now, inside of this unit, there are 9 inner layers and 6 outer layers, each one of them a different gelesic state. These are the beginnings, and they each have an encryption tone and sound, and of course they each would have specific characteristics inherent to them and those kind of things. But it's most important just to understand that there are 6 outer layers within the Pardaki, and the Pardaki actually extends this far. So you have 6 outer layers and then the 9 inner layers. And the 9th layer, if you count them moving out from the middle, is called the Ka. Now, the Ka layer, we have the Ka, the Ma, and the Ta, and they progressively run back in here. We have the charts with all their little names and what state of ether vapor they actually are. Because what we're dealing with is something called the Etha, or the Eta is what it started as way back in the first Pardaki was conceptualized before it was born, when it was first a thought. All right, so it has to do with this Eta substance that goes through this process in the birthing of the Pardaki process, where it becomes eventually the ethers, and it is the core of all manifest transaction or a manifestation of any kind, where consciousness turns into ethers, and then the ethers become different things. So all of that information of how those ethers get there, that's in that first stage of the journey before the birth of the first Pardaki. So eventually